Every year, the world builds close to 200 million televisions, and every single one of them ships with the same invisible rule attached. The screen stays where it is, and you go to it. For 70 years, nobody could break that rule, because nobody could figure out how to make light bright enough while making it small enough. Then, in May of 2026, a company in Shanghai quietly announced it had solved the one problem that was holding the entire thing back. The announcement was not a new television. It was not a bigger screen, or a sharper picture, or a thinner panel. It was a change in how a chip smaller than a grain of rice gets manufactured. On paper, it sounds like the most boring news in consumer electronics. In practice, it is the reason engineers across the display industry spent the summer redrawing their roadmaps. Because the thing that company makes is not a screen you look at. It is a screen that stops existing as an object at all. To understand why this matters, you need to understand three things. Why the television became the most successful piece of furniture in human history. Why every single attempt to replace it has failed in exactly the same way. And what Chinese engineers finally did differently. There's actually a much bigger story behind all of this that I couldn't fit into this video. So I put it together in an ebook for anyone who wants to go deeper. You can find it in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Now let's get back to the video. The rectangle that conquered the world. Look around the room you are in right now. There is almost certainly a rectangle of glowing glass somewhere in it. On the wall, on the desk, in your hand. We are so surrounded by screens that we have stopped seeing them as technology at all. They are just part of the furniture, like doors and windows, and that did not happen by accident. The flat panel display won because it does something genuinely remarkable. It takes electricity and turns it into any image you can imagine, millions of times per second, for hours on end, without moving a single part. It is silent. It does not wear out the way mechanical things do. It can show you a football match, a spreadsheet, a video call with someone on the other side of the planet, and a recipe for chicken soup, all in the same afternoon, using the same piece of glass. It also got absurdly cheap. In the early 2000s, a large flat screen was a luxury purchase that people saved up for. Today, a screen that would have been the most expensive item in a house 20 years ago sits in a supermarket aisle next to the microwaves. The price collapsed because manufacturing scaled up to a degree that is genuinely hard to picture. Panel factories run on sheets of glass the size of small apartments, cut down into hundreds of screens at a time. In the early 2000s, that scale had a center of gravity. 20 years ago, Chinese manufacturers were buying almost all of their display panels from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Today, mainland China accounts for over 70% of global LCD capacity, and in 2025, it supplied roughly 95% of the world's LCD panels, with BOE leading global LCD shipments across smartphones, tablets, laptops, monitors, and televisions for years running. Data from China's Center for Information Industry Development puts the country at 55% of the global display panel market and 43% of display materials, ranking first worldwide in both. So when we talk about who decides what the next screen looks like, we are largely talking about factories in Hefei, Wuhan, Shenzhen, and Chengdu. That matters for the rest of this story, and we will come back to it. But here is the thing about the flat panel display that almost nobody says out loud. It is a spectacular solution to a problem that has quietly stopped being the problem. A television is designed around one core assumption: that the viewer will come to a fixed location, sit still, and point their face at a specific rectangle for an extended period of time. Every design decision follows from that. The size, the weight, the stand, the wall mount, the room layout, the sofa position. We do not just own televisions, we arrange our homes around them. The living room is not a room that happens to contain a screen. It is a room built to face one, and the world stopped living like that. But there is a catch. And it is a big one. The numbers have been drifting for a while, and they are drifting in one direction. Global TV shipments in the third quarter of 2025 came in at 49.75 million units, down 4.9% year on year. The first time in history that third quarter shipments have fallen below 50 million, according to TrendForce, with the decline attributed to longer replacement cycles and the fading effect of China's subsidy programs. For the full year, global shipments were expected to land around 195.59 million units, a 1.2% decrease year on year. Omdia recorded a similar pattern earlier in the year, with second quarter shipments falling to 47.1 million units and declines of 9.7% in Western Europe, 7.4% in North America, and 4.5% in Japan. That is not a collapse. Nobody is claiming televisions are about to vanish, but look at what the industry did in response. It did not make better televisions, it made bigger ones. The average screen size keeps climbing because that is the only lever left to pull. When you cannot sell more units, you sell more inches. Meanwhile, watch where attention actually went. The youngest cohort in GWI's global survey spends 2 hours and 44 minutes a day watching all types of television combined, which is almost half an hour less than the overall average. They still watch. They just do not watch the way the living room was designed for. They watch standing on a train. They watch during a lunch break. They watch 3 minutes at a time, in a queue, with one earbud in. And the screen, the actual physical rectangle, cannot follow them. It never could. That is its one unfixable flaw. Think about what a television actually is when you strip away the marketing. It is a sheet of glass with a backlight, a frame, a power supply, a cooling design, a stand, and a shipping box, all of which exist for one purpose: to hold a picture in a fixed position in space so that a human can walk over and look at it. The picture itself, the only part you actually want, is a layer thinner than a sheet of paper. Everything else is scaffolding. We built an entire global industry around the scaffolding. Now ask the obvious question. What if you did not need the scaffolding? What if the picture could just be there, in front of your eyes, at whatever size you wanted, wherever you happen to be standing? That question is not new. It is one of the oldest dreams in consumer technology. And for more than a decade, every company that chased it, including the richest companies on Earth, walked directly into the same wall. Why every previous attempt failed. The graveyard here is genuinely impressive. These were not small companies with bad ideas. These were the best funded engineering teams in the world, and they all lost to the same enemy. Start with Google Glass. It launched to enormous fanfare in the early 2010s. A tiny display floating at the corner of your vision, a camera, a voice assistant. On paper, it was the future. In practice, it had a small monochrome-ish window of information, awkward battery life, and a social problem that turned out to be fatal. People did not want to talk to someone wearing a camera on their face. The consumer version was pulled. The product became a punchline. Then came the big immersive headsets. Microsoft's HoloLens 2 and Apple's Vision Pro both started at $3,500. Both were technical marvels, both were extraordinary demos, and both hit the same set of walls. The Vision Pro weighs 650 grams and is worn with a strap, and reviewers repeatedly compared the experience to wearing a ski mask. 650 grams does not sound like much until you strap it to the front of your skull for 2 hours. Microsoft went on to end HoloLens 2 with no direct replacement, saying support for existing headsets will end on December 31st, 2027. And Apple's headset reportedly saw an unusually high rate of returns, with the team later redistributed and a lighter follow-up shelved in favor of glasses. Reports in 2026 described Apple as having stepped back from the Vision Pro entirely, citing price and weight while continuing to invest in a lighter, glasses-shaped future. Notice the pattern. Every single failure came down to the same trade-off. You could have a great image, or you could have something a person would actually wear in public. Never both. And that trade-off was not a design failure. It was physics. Here is the part that most coverage skips. In a normal television, the light source and the image are the same size. The panel is 30 inches across, the picture is 30 inches across. Simple. In a pair of glasses, you have a few cubic centimeters of space in the temple arm, and you need to produce an image that appears to the viewer as if it were a large screen several feet away. So you need a tiny display, a projector, and a piece of optics called a waveguide that carries the light across the lens and bends it into your eye. That waveguide is where the nightmare lives. Waveguides are shockingly inefficient. A huge fraction of the light you send in never reaches the eye. So to end up with an image you can see in daylight, the tiny source has to be violently, ridiculously bright to begin with. Now, how bright is a normal television? A few hundred to a couple of thousand nits. A very high-end premium TV might peak higher for short bursts. To put a readable image through a waveguide and into your eye outdoors, engineers estimated you needed a source producing brightness in the millions of nits, from a panel the size of a fingernail, running on a battery that fits in a spectacle arm, without cooking the side of your head. For years, the available options could not do it. Micro OLED is beautiful, and it is what most immersive headsets use, but organic materials degrade when you drive them hard, so pushing them to those brightness levels burns them out. LCO and DLP work by shining a lamp at a chip and blocking the light you do not want, which means you are generating enormous heat and throwing most of your light away, and you still need space for the lamp and the optics. Every path led to the same dead end. Bright enough meant too big, too hot, or too short-lived. Small enough meant too dim to see outside. This is the wall. Not software, not design, not taste. Photons per cubic centimeter. So the question that decided the entire future of the screen was actually a material science question. Could you build a light source that is inorganic, so it does not burn out, that emits light directly instead of blocking it, that is measured in microns instead of millimeters, and that can be manufactured by the million without costing more than the glasses it goes into? For about a decade, the honest answer was no. The breakthrough nobody was watching. The team that cracked it did not come from Silicon Valley, and it did not come from a consumer brand you have heard of. It came from Jade Bird Display, known as JBD, founded in 2015 and headquartered in Pudong, Shanghai, with a large-scale production base in Hefei, led by founder and chief executive Dr. Li Qiming. The company does not sell glasses, it does not sell televisions. It makes one thing, and it makes it obsessively: the smallest, brightest light engines in the world. Their approach was to abandon organic materials entirely and build the display out of micro-LEDs. Not the marketing term used on some large televisions, but the literal thing: individual inorganic light-emitting diodes shrunk down to a few microns across, packed together on a silicon backplane where each pixel generates its own light directly. Inorganic LEDs have a property that matters enormously here. You can drive them extremely hard. They do not degrade the way organics do. That is why LED bulbs last for years while running hot. If you can shrink one down to microscopic scale without destroying its efficiency, you get exactly what the waveguide problem demands: absurd brightness from a speck of material. Here is why nobody had done it. Shrinking an LED is not like shrinking a transistor. When you cut a light-emitting diode down to a few microns, the ratio of surface to volume explodes, and the edges of the material become traps where energy leaks out as heat instead of light. Engineers call this the size effect, and it gets worse the smaller you go. It is particularly brutal for red light, because the material used for red is more fragile at small scales than the material used for blue and green, so the industry was stuck in a beautiful trap. Everyone agreed micro-LED was theoretically the right answer. Nobody could make the red one work. Think of it like trying to make a candle smaller and smaller while keeping the flame just as bright. At some point, you are not holding a candle anymore, you are holding a wick that burns out instantly. What JBD had to do was the equivalent of shrinking the candle to the size of a pinhead and making the flame brighter than the original. They attacked it on two fronts at once, and this is the part that makes the story interesting, because it is not one clever trick. It is a decade of grinding on two separate problems that only pay off together. The first front was the physics of the emitter itself. Boosting red brightness has been the toughest challenge in micro-LEDs, and JBD focused on hybrid integrated semiconductor technology, sticking with Algan P for red because it has the ideal band gap and is the most mature material for high-performance red LEDs. The company's own account credits multiple breakthroughs stacked together, including advanced epitaxial material growth, suppression of non-radiative recombination, and beam shaping technology, with the key being to minimize the size effect using next-generation ultra-thin epitaxy and strong passivation. Translated into plain English, non-radiative recombination is the technical name for energy that goes in and does not come out as light. Passivation is essentially sealing the edges of the material so the energy stops leaking out of the sides. So the fix was, make the light-emitting layer thinner and cleaner, then seal the edges so nothing escapes where it should not. Simple to say. It took years. The climb is documented year by year, and it is worth hearing as a sequence. Red micro-LED brightness went from 300,000 nits in 2021 to over 500,000 in 2022 to 750,000 by February 2023, and then past 1,000,000 nits, matching the best blue micro-LEDs, while green sat at 5,000,000. A year later, the company reported green reaching an industry-leading 8 million nits, blue climbing to 1.5 million, and red holding above 1 million. Sit with those numbers for a second. A high-end television is measured in the hundreds or low thousands of nits. This is a component measured in millions, not because anyone wants to be blinded, but because the waveguide is going to eat almost all of it before it reaches your eye. And the panel producing that is genuinely tiny. The 0.13-inch VGA microLED display has an active area of just 2.64 millimeters by 2.02 millimeters. That is smaller than a grain of rice. The monochrome panels offer a pixel density of 6,350 pixels per inch, and the 0.13-inch AMMU LED display won SID's Display of the Year award in 2023. For reference, a very sharp smartphone screen is somewhere around 500 pixels per inch. The second front was packaging that emitter into something a glasses manufacturer could actually use. That became the Hummingbird. JBD described it as the world's smallest and lightest projector, with a volume of 0.4 cubic centimeters and a weight of just 1.0 gram, small enough to sit inside the temple of a pair of glasses, delivering an output of 3 to 5 lumens and around 1,800 nits through a waveguide, bright enough to stay readable outdoors while drawing as little as 260 milliwatts. 1 gram, 4/10 of a cubic centimeter, a quarter of a watt. That is the entire display system. Then it kept shrinking. Towards the end of 2025, the company launched the Roadrunner Eye, built on a 10,160 pixel per inch panel with a 2.5 micron pitch, engineered down to 0.2 cubic centimeters and half a gram, and in June 2026 introduced the Roadrunner 2, a full-color projector at 1/8 cubic centimeters, alongside a monocular full-color AR glasses development kit. Half a gram, 10,000 pixels per inch, and that still was not the announcement that changed the industry's mind, the number that made the industry stop talking. Here is something worth understanding about hardware. A brilliant component that cannot be mass-produced is not a product. It is a museum piece. The history of display technology is littered with beautiful demos that never left the lab because nobody could make 10 million of them at a price anyone would pay. Micro-LED microdisplays had exactly that problem, and the reason is a mismatch that sounds almost stupidly simple. The LED material grows on one kind of wafer. The silicon backplane, the electronic layer that switches each pixel, is made on another kind of wafer in a standard semiconductor fab. And those two wafers were different sizes. The LED side was being made on small 4-inch wafers. Modern silicon runs on 12-inch wafers, so every time you bonded them together, you were placing a small circle onto a much bigger circle and wasting most of the expensive silicon. Many micro-LED companies proposed moving to 8-inch wafer flows as the fix, but JBD's analysis found two critical flaws. Geometrically, 56% of the backplane area still went unused because of the size mismatch, and experimental data consistently showed low yields during bonding and substrate removal, a problem that remained unsolved. So the company decided to skip the 8-inch step entirely and leap directly to 12-inch. The method they used has a name that describes it perfectly. Qualified dies are placed onto a temporary 12-inch carrier substrate with high placement accuracy and uniformity, creating a reconstructed epitaxial wafer, which is then bonded at wafer level to a matching 12-inch silicon backplane. Think of it like this. Instead of trying to grow one enormous perfect sheet of LED material, which nobody knows how to do reliably, you grow small sheets you know are good, you test them, you throw away the bad pieces, and then you carefully tile the good pieces onto a big carrier until you have built an artificial full-size wafer out of verified parts. It is closer to laying a mosaic than to casting a single slab. And because you only ever place pieces you already know are good, defects get filtered out before they enter the expensive part of the process instead of after. JBD announced this on May 15, 2026, saying it had addressed the technical and process bottlenecks of 12-inch wafer reconstitution and established a validated process architecture, with end-to-end validation completed on its pilot line, where wafer reconstitution yield exceeded 98%, and the company now accelerating the transfer to volume production. Dr. Lee described it as overcoming a key bottleneck in large format mass production and achieving an optimal balance between efficiency and cost. 98%. That is the number, not the brightness, not the pixel density, the yield. The company's stated benefits are specific: significantly more efficient use of silicon backplane wafers, defects mitigated before they carry into finished devices, less variability downstream, and materially improved yield, combining the process maturity of small format epitaxy with the scale advantages of advanced 12-inch backplanes, providing a practical path to upgrade manufacturing before native 12-inch epitaxy becomes commercially viable. That last clause is the honest part, and I want to flag it rather than gloss over it. This is a bridge, not a final destination. It is a way of getting scale now, using a technique that works, while the industry waits for the ideal method that does not exist yet. Which is, frankly, how most real manufacturing revolutions actually happen. JBD has also raised $140 million in a Series B2 round and begun construction on the second phase of its Hefei fab. That is not a company preparing for a demo. That is a company preparing for volume. And volume is exactly where this stops being a component story and starts being a consumer story. Why this is happening in China and not somewhere else. A brilliant chip is necessary. It is nowhere near sufficient. To turn a light engine into something people wear, you need optics, batteries, chips, acoustics, hinges, frames, prescription lenses, assembly lines, and a dozen consumer brands willing to fight each other on price. You need an entire ecosystem, and ecosystems take decades to build. China spent those decades building it for something else, and now it is being pointed at this. Remember the panel dominance from earlier? 70% of LCD capacity, the majority of the world's supply, the largest display manufacturer on Earth that did not just produce cheap televisions. It produced 2 decades of accumulated knowledge in optical materials, thin film processing, precision assembly, and supply chain logistics, plus a workforce and a network of thousands of component suppliers within driving distance of each other. That is the same advantage a country gets when it already grows the raw material it needs. Nobody has to build the system from scratch, and you can see it in the products. TCL's RayNeo X3 Pro runs on full-color microLED, using an ultra-compact 2500 nit full-color display engine built from 3 monochrome microLED panels supplied by JBD, in what the company confirmed was the first full integration of its image quality engine for waveguide AR glasses into a shipping product. Rokid's glasses use JBD's monochrome microLED microdisplays. Rokid's AI glasses style are listed at 38.5 grams with a 12-megapixel camera and around 12 hours of mixed use on a charge. 38.5 grams. Go back and compare that to 650. The competitive field is crowded in the way that only ever happens when something is about to get cheap. RayNeo, Rokid, IMO, and XReal are all pushing multiple brands and price points, and IMO's Go 3 supports real-time translation across a very large number of languages. RayNeo's Air 4 Pro launched in early 2026 at an aggressive $299, while its high-end X3 Pro sits up at around $1,799. That price spread is the tell. When a category has a $300 model and an $1,800 model from the same company, the category has left the prototype phase. The shipment data backs it up. According to IDC, global smart glasses shipments in the first half of 2025 reached 4.065 million units, a year-on-year increase of 64.2%. Across the full year, smart glasses shipped 7.25 million units, representing roughly half of all XR hardware sold. Industry projections put China's own smart glasses shipments at around 2.75 million units in 2025, more than double the previous year. And the forecast for the display-equipped category specifically, the kind that actually replaces a screen rather than just adding a camera and a voice assistant, is where it gets interesting. IDC expects optical see-through display glasses from companies like XReal, Vichur, and RayNeo to grow from 3 million units in 2026 to 12.2 million by 2030, a compound annual growth rate of 41.9%, with average selling prices holding in the $516 to $547 range. 12 million units a year by 2030 is not a television replacement. Let us be precise about that. 200 million televisions still ship annually. But the direction of the two curves is the entire story. One is grinding downward while getting physically larger. The other is compounding at over 40% a year while getting physically smaller, the factory floor and the honest problems. Now, the part that most videos about this technology skip because it is less exciting. This is not solved. There are real, serious, unsolved problems, and pretending otherwise would be doing you a disservice. First, color. The brightness records that get quoted are mostly per color, and green has always been the easy one. Getting 3 colors to combine into a clean white image uniformly across a waveguide is genuinely hard. Waveguides tend to smear color across the field of view, which is why JBD had to launch the industry's first waveguide image quality correction equipment specifically to tackle color unevenness. When you read that a display engine outputs 2,500 nits in a shipping product versus millions at the panel, you are seeing exactly how much the optics eat. Second, field of view. A pair of glasses does not fill your vision the way a headset does, and the wider you push the field of view, the harder every other problem becomes. That is why the industry ships different products for different jobs. JBD's Hummingbird targets around 30 degrees, while the wider Phoenix series was designed for waveguides above 50 degrees. 30 degrees is a floating window, excellent for notifications, navigation, and translation. It is not a cinema. Third, and this is the one people underestimate, television is social. A screen on a wall is a shared object. 4 people watch the same film. Glasses are, by definition, one person's view. No technology has solved the problem of a family watching something together while each wearing their own display, and it is not obvious that it should be solved. Fourth, competition and ecosystem. Ray-Ban Meta and Oakley Meta together accounted for approximately 97% of AI smart glasses volume in 2025. IDC's early 2026 tracker put RayNeo at 3.4% share, Xiaomi at 3.1%, Vichur at 2.5% after growing 94.9% year-on-year, and Xreal at 2%, with a long tail of Chinese and global brands making up 19.8% collectively. The Chinese supply chain may dominate the optics and the light engines, but the brand and software layer is a completely different fight, and it is far from settled. Fifth, privacy. A screen on a wall does not have a camera pointed at the room. A pair of glasses does, and the social discomfort that killed Google Glass over a decade ago has not magically evaporated. Some manufacturers now ship camera-free models specifically to sidestep it. That is a design response to a social problem, not a solution to it. So no, your television is not about to become a paperweight. That is not what any of this says. What it says is subtler and, I think, more interesting. For 70 years, the display and the object were the same thing. If you wanted a picture, you bought a rectangle, put it somewhere, and organized your life around it. The screen was a place. What JBD and the companies building on top of it are doing is separating those two things. The picture is becoming a component that weighs half a gram and draws a quarter of a watt, and can be dropped into anything: glasses, a car mirror, a helmet, a windscreen. The same company has already launched an automotive-grade micro-LED projection platform for rear-view mirrors and doors. It is also collaborating on a custom micro-LED architecture for smart contact lenses. Once the display stops being furniture and becomes an ingredient, the question is no longer which television you buy. It is whether the concept of buying a television still makes sense, in the same way that people stopped buying video cameras once the camera became a component inside something they already carried. The camera did not die, it disappeared into everything. That is what obsolete usually means in technology. Not destroyed, absorbed, and notice how quietly it happened. There was no keynote with a stadium and a countdown. The decisive moment in this entire story was a press release about wafer sizes, issued by a company most people have never heard of, describing a yield figure, 98%. That is what actually moves industries, not the demo, the yield. If this changed how you think about the rectangle you have been staring at your whole life, hit like and subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you. There are related videos on screen right now if you want to keep going. And here is the question I keep coming back to. For 70 years, we assumed the screen had to be a place you go to because that was the only way physics allowed. What else are we still arranging our lives around? Not because it makes sense, but because a limitation from decades ago quietly became a habit nobody thought to question. Let me know in the comments.